Hi all, today's topic is the novel Wuthering Heights. Wuthering Heights is a classic Gothic romance novel written by Emily Bronte, first published in 1847 under the pen name Alice Bell. In 1850, it was republished under Emily's real name. Wuthering means violent turbulent weather, usually created by strong winds. The tone of the novel is summed up by this word. It tells a tale of love, envy, betrayal, revenge, and the complex relationships of the characters. It is set in the harsh, rough, and isolated atmosphere of Yorkshire moors in northern England. It is the setting which contributes heavily to the forming of the element of horror which makes this novel Gothic. Wuthering Heights is the name of the house where the important events of the novel happen. It is the story of two families, the Enshaws and the Lindons. The Enshaws living at Wuthering Heights and the Lindons at Thrushcross Grange. The two houses are around 4 miles apart, separated by moors and hills. The main characters of the story are Mr. Enshaw, owner of Wuthering Heights, Catherine Enshaw, daughter of Enshaw, Hindley, son of Enshaw, Frances, wife of Hindley, Heathcliff, an orphan, Hareton, son of Hindley, Edgar Linden, heir to Thrushcross Grange, Isabella Linden, sister of Edgar, Catherine Linden or Cathy, daughter of Edgar, Linden Heathcliff, son of Heathcliff and Isabella, Mr. Lockwood, tenant of Thrushcross Grange, Ellen Nellie Dean, housekeeper of Thrushcross Grange. The novel has two narrators, Mr. Lockwood and Ellen Nellie Dean. Lockwood, tenant at Thrushcross Grange, narrates the opening chapters of the novel. Ellen Nellie Dean, the housekeeper of Thrushcross Grange, tells the entire story of the two families to Lockwood. The first person the reader meets in the novel is Mr. Lockwood. The novel opens in 1801. Lockwood, a gentleman from London, has rented a house called Thrushcross Grange, which is owned by Heathcliff. The landlord lives in a farmhouse nearby named Wuthering Heights. Lockwood decides to visit the landlord. There he receives a cold welcome. He decides to visit there again. During his second visit, Lockwood meets some mysterious residents of Wuthering Heights. He meets Heathcliff's daughter-in-law Cathy, a beautiful young woman who is cold towards him, and a young man, Hareton, Heathcliff's nephew, who dresses and talks like a servant. Lockwood is stuck in the house due to the storm and has to spend the night at Wuthering Heights. In the bedroom, he sees the names of Catherine Enshaw, Catherine Heathcliff, and Catherine Linden. He also finds the diary of Catherine and begins reading it. From this, Lockwood learns about Catherine and Heathcliff. He falls asleep reading the diary. He has a nightmare that Catherine is calling from outside the window saying, "Let me in." He feels her ice-cold hand and sees a little girl's face outside the window. He wakes up yelling. Hearing the scream, Heathcliff comes there. Lockwood goes downstairs and he hears Heathcliff begging for the ghost to reappear. The next day, Lockwood returns to Thrushcross Grange and falls ill. He asks his housekeeper to tell him about the residents of Wuthering Heights. The housekeeper Nellie Dean now becomes the main narrator and continues the story. She was an eyewitness of most of the incidents occurring in the novel. She tells Lockwood how Heathcliff became master of both Thrushcross Grange and Wuthering Heights. The story begins 30 years ago. The previous owner of the Wuthering Heights was Mr. Enshaw. The Enshaws have two children, Hindley and Catherine. Mr. Enshaw travels to Liverpool, where he finds a homeless gypsy boy whom he decides to adopt as his son. He names him Heathcliff. Enshaw's son, Hindley, feels jealous of Heathcliff because of his father's affection towards this newcomer, and he begins to hate Heathcliff. But Enshaw's daughter Catherine grows very attached to him. A great childhood friendship develops between Catherine and Heathcliff. Enshaw's wife dies. His son Hindley is sent away to college. After some years, Enshaw's health declines and finally he dies. Hindley returns for father's funeral and, much to everyone's surprise, brings his wife Frances. Hindley, now as head of the house, takes revenge on Heathcliff by degrading him to the status of a servant. Heathcliff and Catherine continues their intimacy. One day they run down to the Thrushcross Grange, a more civilized house, where the Lindens live with their children, Edgar and Isabella. Catherine is attacked by one of their guard dogs and she is taken inside. When the Lindens find out that the girl belongs to Enshaw family, they take good care of her and they send back Heathcliff. Catherine stays at the Grange for 5 weeks. The Lindens are well-mannered and live an upper-class lifestyle. From them, Catherine learns good manners and becomes a lady of high upbringing and status. She returns to Wuthering Heights. Unlike Heathcliff, Edgar Linden was a noble young man with a good education, decent upbringing and sophisticated manners. Catherine finds Edgar's wealth and beauty more attractive. She becomes close to Edgar. Catherine is still passionate about Heathcliff, but sees no chance for a secure future with him. She thinks that if she marries Heathcliff, it will degrade her. Edgar proposes to Catherine and she accepts it. After hearing that Catherine is going to marry Edgar, Heathcliff leaves Wuthering Heights. Hindley's wife Frances dies after giving birth to their son, Hareton Earnshaw. Hindley avoids his son and becomes heavily addicted to alcohol and gambling. Catherine marries Edgar and moves to Thrushcross Grange. Nellie joins them as housekeeper. Heathcliff returns as a rich man and his manners have improved. Hindley lets him live in his house so that he can borrow money from him for gambling. Catherine is delighted to see Heathcliff and she continues to see him despite her husband's disapproval. Heathcliff takes control of Wuthering Heights by paying Hindley's gambling debts. His relationship with the Lindens becomes more and more strained as Edgar becomes extremely unhappy with Heathcliff's relationship with Catherine. Their fight provokes Catherine and she shuts herself in her room for 3 days and becomes ill. Edgar's sister, Isabella Linden, finds Heathcliff attractive and charming. She falls in love with him unaware of his true nature. Heathcliff realizes Isabella's affection. He elopes with Isabella and marries her. Edgar disowns his sister. The marriage develops into an abusive and miserable relationship. Heathcliff uses her as a tool in his revenge against her family, especially against her brother Edgar, who married Catherine, the only woman Heathcliff has ever loved. He also wants to gain access to Thrushcross Grange. Heathcliff and Isabella return after 2 months. Edgar forbids him to visit his house, but he manages to see Catherine, who is now an expectant mother. Edgar takes care of sick Catherine. Heathcliff becomes concerned about her health. Catherine dies after giving birth to a baby girl, Cathy. Upon Catherine's death, Heathcliff sobs that he cannot live without his soul. He even begs her to haunt him the rest of his life. At Wuthering Heights, Heathcliff treats Isabella in a very terrible manner. She escapes from there and goes to London and gives birth to Heathcliff's son, Linden. Only 6 months after Catherine's death, her brother Hindley also dies. By paying all debts of Hindley, Heathcliff becomes the owner of Wuthering Heights. Hindley's son, Hareton, now lives at the mercy of Heathcliff. He brings up Hareton as a savage, deliberately denying him education and culture. He treats Hareton just like Hindley treated Heathcliff. Heathcliff's wife, Isabella, dies 13 years later and Edgar brings her son, Linden, back to Thrushcross Grange to live with him and his daughter Cathy. But Heathcliff insists that Linden should come to live with him at Wuthering Heights. Catherine and Edgar's daughter, Cathy, grows to be a beloved and charming girl. She is a milder version of her mother. Heathcliff wants Linden to marry Cathy. He purposely cultivates a friendship between them. Edgar stands against it. Heathcliff forces her to marry Linden. Heathcliff locks Cathy in Wuthering Heights and wouldn't let her go to see her dying father unless she agrees to marry Linden. Later, Edgar dies and Thrushcross Grange becomes virtually Heathcliff's property. Since Linden was sick, he dies a month after the wedding and all the property goes to his father, Heathcliff. Heathcliff now owns both Wuthering Heights and Thrushcross Grange. Cathy finds herself completely dependent on Heathcliff. Eventually, she becomes friend with Hareton. She tries to educate him, and a sort of affection develops between them. Now the story is back to present when Lockwood has rented Thrushcross Grange. It is Nellie who is telling the story to Lockwood. Lockwood goes back to London, and after several months he returns to Wuthering Heights. He learns from Nellie that Heathcliff had died 3 months before and was buried in a grave next to that of Catherine Earnshaw. People believe that ghosts of them roam the area at night. Before Lockwood leaves for London, he hears that the young Cathy and Hareton are to be married, the two contrasting families are to be united and move to Thrushcross Grange. The novel can be divided into 2 parts. The first part dealing with Catherine Earnshaw, Heathcliff, Hindley, Edgar and Isabella. The second part dealing with young Cathy, Lyndon Heathcliff, Hareton and Heathcliff's revenge. The hero and villain is the same person, Heathcliff. He is one of the mightiest characters of the story. After losing Catherine, he loses his humanity and becomes more fiendish in his feelings and actions. Emily Bronte managed to make her novel Wuthering Heights a gothic one by creating wild and dark characters, creepy environment, uncanny plots and supernatural scenes, which are important elements in most gothic novels. Wuthering Heights is one of the most highly imaginative novels in the English language, which made Emily Bronte an author to be remembered beyond ages. That's all for today. Thank you for watching.